When you replace space with light, acting as a messenger, the possibility of a static and timeless universe becomes acceptable, even if that universe could not be grasped by our senses. The problem can be divided into two parts. First, to be recorded on Earth by our limited senses, light from a distant star would initially need to be packaged or quantized. This should cause the separation between light and space. This is the case, for example, with 8 minutes of sunlight retention within the future cone of light of the Sun. Second, one can imagine that in the cone-forming process the space would bend, resulting in delayed delivery of the message to the addressee. However, to this moment no time interval that could be allocated to the light quantization phase has been measured. Without time there would be no real separation between light and space. That is, even in bending, space would remain virtually two-dimensional. Thus, light and space would form, for all intents and purposes, a continuous whole or just one thing. The main consequence of this would be the virtual leveling between the maximum and minimum energy extremes of light. Due to the virtual polarization resulting from the packaging of light, there would be, for example, no separation between ultraviolet and infrared. After the light of the star scattered on Earth, Doppler shows us the space is continuously curved. The polarization of light becomes perfectly recordable with the sharp separation between the energetic extremes of cosmic background radiation supporting Doppler. There seems to be no more uncertainty in the position of the source, simply tracking its light in the past's direction to reach the point occupied by the star in space. If this were real, Doppler would stand in the universe, would become hostage to circular and uniform motion. We know, however, that it is not so. This problem resulting from the hypothetical fusion of light and space, once resolved, could root out some incongruities. For example, it could not be accepted without question that the same mass and solar volume, conserved over time, could simultaneously manage the orbits of all its 8 planets, from the same curvature in space. To be aware of the existence of the universe, we would have been held hostage to time in the past. In this case, we would have been virtually banished from that place. That is, light and cosmic radiation as a whole would be holding our consciousness in the past, in a curious form of temporal exile. How to justify this crazy thinking? This would be possible if light and space had become one thing, merging into one whole. This already happens in practice. If space bends, so does light, and vice versa. In the birthday balloon model, light from a distant star would shift, on its two-dimensional surface, as concentric circular waves, following the curvature of the balloon. In the 1919 eclipse, which made Einstein an even bigger celebrity, it cannot be said that space would have communicated, directly, its curvature around the Sun, for the eclipse observers were dependent on the deviation suffered by the light emitted by the distant stars. The curvature event was spotted by comparing the photos, which revealed the positions of the stars in the background, before and after the eclipse. A photo is nothing more than a snapshot of our past, which depends on the light to be obtained. Outside of our photo, and in order to make this communication, space would be dependent on gravity waves, which would travel at the limited speed of light. Unlike space, light needs to be condensed or packaged to have its existence revealed to the observer. The evidence of the virtual fusion between space and light is given to us by the scientific community itself. One tells us that space would behave like a rubber band. What would behave like an elastic band would be light one performing its harmonic movement, not space itself. To merge space and light into one thing, this process of energy quantization would have been able to retain any length of time needed to complete the packaging process until light was scattered through the subatomic particles. This really happens in practice because quantization is delivered ready to us by nature. That is, there is no amount of time that could be spent in the process of quantization. By holding time, or subtracting it from our physical reality, quantization could polarize light and level the maximum and minimum energy extremes of the Maxwell spectrum, even virtually, or just from our point of view. This would result in the virtual fusion between space and light, leading us to model of the two-dimensional surface of our birthday balloon. The stationary phase of light quantization would occur before the scattering of photons, but the resulting polarization would appear projected in the past of the celestial vault, or after the addition of time, as an additional dimension. It would come in the form of the redshifting. Physicists tangent the synergetic leveling of light to its scattering when they tell us that a distant star would behave as if it were a poinsettia, emitting concentric circular waves. Like the waves formed by a rock that was thrown into a lake, the waves would move on the two-dimensional surface of the water, all at the same speed. It should be noted that, due to the aforementioned leveling, this space would have merged into the light itself, losing its depth dimension. Thanks to the retention of time, still, the packaging of light could simulate a fictional curvature in space, which would become real after light scattering near the observer. In the case of the Centaurus Alpha, remote tracking suggests that the light emitted by this star would have been retained for 4.3 years within its cone of light of the future. When cosmic radiation projects itself into the celestial vault and allows its instant tracking in the direction of our past, we see a totally different picture of what was described before it was scattered. Waves become real and virtually continuous, and their previous polarization shows us, at Doppler, a predominance of infrared light in the spectrum of most galaxies. The arrow at time is now reversed in our position, where it starts counting, no longer pointing towards the future and continually pointing to our past. Like the continuous thread of a ball of wool, unwound from the Big Bang, light tells us that we could follow it in one direction and the other, making space homogeneous and isotropic. The light that would have come from Alpha of the Centaur at an earlier time, due to the leveling between ultraviolet and infrared, would have remained dim in space until it reached us on Earth. It can be said, by a principle of exclusion of direct access to our future, that the light of the aforementioned star has always been at our disposal on Earth, to be followed only in the direction of our past. Otherwise, the star could not be spotted instantly. This is in keeping with the retention of time in our future, or during the quantization and packaging phase of light. Physicists suggest that the circular waves of light emitted by that star would overlap over time, forming a straight and three-dimensional cone of light, called the cone of light of the future. This results from a comparison with what is observed after light scattering, not from a direct measurement. Indeed, the lack of real time in our future does not even predict the existence of waves, since there would be no movement in the absence of measurable time. Newton's laws are not applicable under these conditions. Einstein tried, unsuccessfully, to support his thesis that the universe would be static by proposing his cosmological constant. After Hubble's observations, showing that ours is only one of millions of other galaxies, and the definitive adoption of the redshift by the scientific community, Einstein capitulated for good. I do not see how to criticize any of the parties involved, because, for us, there is only what can be remembered, or what is outside our brain. I believe it is time for us to take seriously into account the processes that shape our points of view, making an effort to break free from the yoke of cosmic background radiation.